Look, I whipped out the orange light for this because, you know, it's October now, so orange lighting is appropriate. So I watched Friday the 13th Part 3 this week, or Friday the 13th Part 3D, but I didn't watch it in 3D. I liked it a lot better than Part 2. Yay! I mean, I've seen it before, so I knew it was going to be much better. But it has been a while since I've seen it all the way through. I've had it over the years on as background TV during this time. But this is the first time in years that I sat down and watched it, if you know what I mean. And yes, this is the one where Jason finally gets his hockey mask. And this movie could have been a lot different of a movie if Amy Steele would have signed on to do this sequel. She was the final girl in number 2, the character of Jenny, and she was actually offered to sign on for the third one, but she decided to pass. But there are really 2 storylines that were being passed around if her character was coming back. One of the storylines gives me like Halloween 2 vibes, where she's in the hospital or a mental hospital recovering from the events that just happened to her and seeing all of her friends killed. And Jason finds out where she is and then goes on a killing rampage throughout the hospital until their final showdown. The one that intrigues me is the version where Jenny is recuperating. She's trying to get her life back to normal. She goes back to college, and this is where she finds out that Jason might still be alive. Paul's body is found in her dormitory, which solves the mystery of what happened to Paul by the end of the second one. Realizing Jason's alive, she starts training in self-defense. And then she goes and hunts him down to have the final showdown with Jason. That is a very intriguing storyline to me. But that's not the movie that we got because of Amy Steele passing on this. Although in recent years, she has admitted that she probably should have signed on to do the third movie, but that's all revisionist history. We don't know where our lives are going to lead, much as we all like to try to control that. But the movie that we did get is a pretty decent Jason movie. And Part 3 takes place right in the aftermath of the events of Part 2. In fact, you have a scene in Part 3 where the new troop of Jason's victims is actually passing the cabin where Jason just had his rampage as the police are taking out the bodies from that rampage. So it's supposed to be just the next day from the events of Friday the 13th Part 2. And this does not take place in a camp. They're not camp counselors. This actually takes place in the cabin of the character Chris, who ends up being the final girl. It's her family's cabin that they are all coming to spend the weekend at. And it turns out Chris, 2 years earlier, had an incident in the woods around the cabin where she was attacked. And this is her first time back in 2 years. But she does not know who attacked her. So she decided to come back for the weekend with her friends. They're all college-age kids, to sort of confront the fear of going to this cabin. And since this is a Friday the 13th movie, it does not go well for her. And I can safely say she went there to try to get over that traumatic event, and I don't think she's gonna get over it. So basically, Jason, the storyline is Jason has been hiding out in the barn on her family's property to recover from the injuries that he suffered from the events of Part 2. Which leads me to question the cops in that area. They must not be great cops, because these murders have just happened again on this lake, where several bodies of 20-year-olds have piled up. And Jason is just chilling in a barn that happens to be on the same lake. Like, the police, after the beginning, and until the very end never show up. So it's like they aren't even looking for the killer. And of course, it follows this classic storyline of Jason where he goes on a killing spree that night and he has a showdown with the final girl, who is Chris this time. And Chris ends up defeating him, thinking he's seemingly dead. At the end of this, the character of Chris is visibly shaken and unwell. I mean, she had a trauma 2 years before where she was attacked. And spoiler alert, her attacker 2 years earlier was also Jason. But she got away then. And she gets away this time. But at the end, they allude to she's never going to be the same again. I mean, like, she's going to spend years in an institution not well at the end of this movie. So like I said, at the beginning of this movie was originally in 3D, which was a trend during the early to mid 80s. 3D is a trend that seems to come back every 30 years or so. So in the 2040s, I expect 3D to come out again in a big way. And I did not watch it in 3D, although I hear you can find it in 3D now. They did release it on DVD in 3D at one point. I watched it in 2D, but you can tell the scenes that are supposed to be in 3D. A lot of things mysteriously poking out at the camera to come and get you for the 3D effect. And the almost only critical praise that the third one got was for the 3D effect. Like I said, a lot of movies at that time came out in 3D. You had like Jaws 3D. Oh yeah, and if it was the third one of a franchise, it was always called like this, Friday the 13th 3D or Jaws 3D. But there were a lot of movies during the early to mid 80s that came out in 3D. Very trendy, but this movie got a lot of praise for its use of 3D, unlike some of the other movies at the time, and that was almost the only praise it got, except shockingly from Gene Siskel, who previously had hated the first movie so much. He had this campaign or vendetta against the makers of the first movie that they should have never made a movie like this. But he goes on to praise the third one in this series. So he praised the 3D effects in this movie, but he also praised the slow burn story technique that they used. The killings in this movie, the main, bodies piling up killings in this movie don't happen until almost an hour into the movie, and it builds storyline. I also would say the acting is better in this movie. That is my opinion. He also mentions the acting of these people is better in this movie than the previous movie. But generally, this movie got bad reviews, and even if Gene Siskel praised this movie, it's not like he really liked this movie. He also said it's just a rehash of the other movies, which yes, every Jason movie is kind of a rehash of the other movies. It follows a formula. It's like a cop show on TV. They all have, like Law and Order, it all has a systematic way of going through. It's going to be a bunch of people in their late teens, early 20s get slaughtered one night, and there's always going to be one girl that defeats them all, or that defeats Jason. And the third movie is one of the biggest successes of the franchise. It was still directed by Steve Miner, who directed the third one, and it came out in August of 1982. It made, at the time of release, $37 million at the box office on still a small budget. The cost of this movie was a little bit more because Paramount had to invest so much money to help theaters get ready for the 3D, but it still made a lot of money. In fact, it is the fourth highest grossing Friday the 13th film and the third in ticket sales, meaning the number of tickets actually sold, not the dollar amount that it totaled. So this is the third most popular in theaters. The only two that sold more tickets were the first one and Jason versus Freddy. And this film, as a departure from being filmed on the East Coast, this is filmed in one of those movie ranches in California nearer to the studios to help cut down on cost. Everything was built for the movie. None of the locations are surviving now. I think the main cabin that they built and the barn survived up until like 20 years ago when it burnt down, but it was on a movie ranch. It wasn't really accessible to people. Even the lake in this movie is fake. And the lake wasn't particularly well done either, but none of that exists anymore. So you can't go and tour it like you can in the first two movies, really the Friday the 13th part 1 and 2. Part 1, you can go and tour the whole place and it looks exactly the same. Number 2, a lot of the cabins and everything still exist, but not exactly the same. But this one, you can't see anything that was there when it was made. So in the end, I think number 3, the acting is better. The storyline is better in this one, even though it does follow the basic path of all of the other movies. I like the addition of the past trauma that Chris, the final girl, had, and how it ends up being Jason. And yes, an hour into the movie where they start the bodies piling up scenario of Jason, he does get his mask. And there is also like an offshoot storyline where there's a biker gang that gets pissed off at a couple of the kids. One of them is Shelly, who portrays the annoying friend in the bunch. We all have that annoying friend, and his name is Shelly in this movie. And the biker gang comes after them after a confrontation in a gas station or convenience store in town. They decide to come after him, but they're just there really to get killed by Jason. And Shelly, the annoying friend, also gets killed by Jason, but he is the owner of the hockey mask that Jason gets in this movie. Jason, after he kills Shelly, he uses that hockey mask to fool another one of his victims into thinking that it's just Shelly coming out, and then he kills her. So if you're watching a marathon of Friday the 13th movies, like me, you can't go wrong with the third one, in my opinion. I don't think it's the best of the movies, but it is one of the better ones. It's a decent Friday the 13th movie, and it's a decent 80s slasher horror film. So if you don't know, my name is Stacia, and this is my little corner on the internet where I like to talk about movies. I'm just a girl out here that likes her movies and likes talking about them. If that sounds something that you like, I invite you to subscribe to my channel and help me get more subscribers. I'm trying to get to 500 by the end of this year, and I'm in striking distance. I'm almost there. And I also like when you comment on the movies. I love talking about movies. Whether or not you agree with me or not, I like the conversation, and I like, if you do disagree with me, to hear that other point of view. There is nothing wrong with that. We can agree to disagree and be respectful about it here. But when you comment, it also helps me out. It helps YouTube push me out to more people. So if you subscribe, like, or comment, that is a signal to YouTube that people who like watching these types of videos are responding to my comment, and they push it out to more people, and that will help me in the end. So if you like this, please do that. Please help me out. But that wraps it up. Again, my name is Stacia. Thank you. See you next time. Bye.